G'day and welcome. I'm Benjamin Morgan, the Chief Executive of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of Australia, and welcome to our Facebook Live panel discussion for Tuesday, the 1st of September 2020. This evening's panel discussion will focus on CASA Avmed and the question, which is, are they keeping pilots grounded here in Australia when they should be out flying and enjoying their privileges? This evening, we're going to be joined by three panelists. Our first panelist is Damien Nott. Damien is a 30-year veteran of the Australian aviation scene. He's a private pilot and commercial pilot. Welcome, Damien.
Thank you. G'day, Ben.
We're joined again by none other, the man himself, Tony White, President of the Sport Aircraft Association. Thank you for joining us this evening, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Ben.
And of course, Dr. Sean Runacres, DAME, and I guess doctor member of the AOPA Pilot Medical Review Panel. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks very much for having me.
So this is an issue that is obviously strikes out to so many people right across the Australian general aviation industry. And I would have to say that in the 4 years that I've been involved with AOPA, this is probably the #1 complaint that I have received, which is the impact that CASA Avmed are having on the private pilot community right across Australia. And so I guess I'd like to start, Sean, by directing my first set of questions to you, because you're fairly recent to the world of DAME and CASA. I think we were talking earlier, it's about 5 years that you've been involved in it. Obviously, coming into this scene, it's probably been a fairly eye-watering and eye-opening experience, has it not?
Yeah, look, initially I thought it was pretty okay, but as I've found pilots who are more interesting to get my teeth into, I have found it more and more painful to get anywhere with them.
Get my mic off mute. Obviously, it's a contentious issue because let's face it, pilots right across the system are going to be facing all manner of medical ailments, and let's be truthful about this. We're not always 100% healthy, but that's also not to say that we're not fit to fly. I mean, in your experience so far, I mean, out of the people that have been coming through your office at Moorabbin, how many pilots have walked through the door that have presented themselves for an aviation medical that realistically probably shouldn't have?
People who I wouldn't feel safe to go flying, I'd be able to count on one hand in 5 years. And I've done 1,200 pilots in that time, easily 1,200 pilots.
Well, it's an interesting question to ask, and I can hear some people out there on Facebook saying, hey, that's a really bad question, and we shouldn't be talking about those that shouldn't have a medical. But I think it is a really interesting question because what I see generally across the aviation industry is people who are fit and able to fly. They've got the skills, they've got the obviously the licenses to prove that. And what I'm hearing from members is that we've got pilots going into DAMEs to apply for a Class 2 medical, and then they're finding out during the course of that medical that they're getting exposed to all manners of tests. Now, Sean, you and I had a conversation just a short second ago as you joined in. You went, Ben, you're not going to believe what I've got to tell you about this pilot who has recently come in for a medical. Maybe let's share that and then we can get some thoughts on it.
Yeah, so I've got a young 50-year-old female who's been flying for years, and I've probably done 2 or 3 medicals for her in the last 5 years. Class 2, rural Victoria, very level-headed person, somebody I'd happily get in the aircraft next to. Came up to me and said, I want a Class 1. No dramas, we'll go through the process. You'll fly through. And pardon the pun. And she had an ECG, which was a little bit unusual, but nothing concerning. Anyway, sent her off to the cardiologist. All my ECGs are reported by an aviation cardiologist. And he came back and said, no, I want to meet this person. And he went through a few tests. And at the end of that, he said, no, I'm happy. She's fit to go flying. CASA came back and said, no, we want further testing. We're declining, or your Class 1's going to be as or with safety pilot. Your Class 2's going to be the same. And if you want to get that removed, you need to do what's known as electrophysiology studies or a cardiac angiogram. Now, I don't expect most people to know what they are, but essentially because it's a pilot medical, it's not covered by Medicare. It's got a price tag, I'm told by the aviation cardiologist, of about $15,000. It needs to be done in a public hospital, which is a problem because it's saved for life-saving emergency kind of management. So you've got to take it offline for that. It comes with a significant risk of complications and death. Put the ECG in front of an electrophysiologist who's an expert in ECGs, and he said there is absolutely no reason to be doing the test. She's filed for a reconsideration, and right now CASA are trying to farm it out to another cardiologist to get a second opinion, because they think, based on a case report of a 95-year-old gentleman who's got cardiac disease, that she's a risk to aviation. It baffles our imagination. I cannot understand why.
There's certainly a lot to unpack in that one story. And I think before we delve too far into this, I would like to say, and I think it really is appropriate to say, that the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association of recent has really found working with Simon May, who's been the new CASA PMO, to be a really refreshing experience. And Simon appears to have brought to the organisation a far more pragmatic approach to these medical challenges. And also Mark Sullivan has also been working with our pilot medical review team, and Dr. David Hook, who's the AOPA Medical Director, who heads up our pilot medical review panel, and Sean, you're part of that, have been working through these processes on particular cases. But for as much as the good work that we are doing through that, we are seeing more and more examples popping up, and also where we've got pilots that seem to be facing all manner of additional assessments. And so I guess one of the questions I'd like to put to you into that early, Sean, is it a common thing? I mean, obviously with the Class 2 and the Class 1 medicals that we're seeing processed, is it common that CASA is asking for additional testing and other assessments to be made that are expensive?
Yep, absolutely. I've got case after case after case that I just scratch my head at. I've got a gentleman who works in he's a chef, and he's had, for some reason, come up with a positive drug test, but it's below the cutoff, the accepted international cutoff for use of drugs. And he explains that because of the environment that he chefs in, that's how he's absorbing it, but he's very clear that he's not using it. He spent $15,000 over 12 months doing hair tests, psychiatric appointments, you name it, he's done it. CASA have still come back and said, despite the evidence that says he clearly doesn't have a problem with drugs, we're going to continue to test him for drugs.
How do they Sean, how do they justify that? I mean, obviously these decisions are coming from somewhere. I mean, these decisions, are they coming from the top? Are they coming from the middle of AVMED? Where are these decisions seeming to originate from?
So I don't understand. It's very hard, so as a doctor, if I ring up another doctor and say I want to speak to them, I will speak to that doctor tomorrow. If I ring up and say I want to speak to somebody, I'll speak to them almost immediately. I fight to speak to anybody in CASA who's a doctor. I fight and often fail. So where are the decisions coming from? I don't know. It strikes me as people are overstretching their qualifications. I don't understand how a GP or somebody with a qualification in occupational medicine, now they're difficult qualifications to get, both of them, but I don't understand how they can overrule a cardiologist, or how they can overrule an addiction medicine specialist, or they can overrule a respiratory physician, or the countless other examples that I've got of people that it baffles me. If you take your aeroplane today to a lamey and he signs it out as fit to go flying, CASA doesn't come down and pull the aircraft apart and pull the lamey's report apart. They trust the lamey. I've got how many years as a trainee doctor? My peers with regards to David Hook and the aviation cardiologist and the addiction medicine specialist have got 15 years of training, let alone post-qualification experience. And CASA, GPs say, oh, we're not going to accept them. We're going to discard their opinion and we're going to hunt around to find a specialist who gives the opinion we want.
Sean, obviously, for a DAME to come out publicly and be talking about these issues are real.
Yep.
Are these views reflected by your colleagues?
So it's very hard for me to meet with colleagues because in some respects it's a competition-based environment. But the few people that I speak to on a regular basis scratch their head regularly. I think we were doing okay until a few years ago when we were without a PMO for about 12, 18 months. And I really think that things really escalated in that time. Now, when I say we were doing okay, obviously we could do a lot better. Like you, I hear the rumours that Dr. Simon May is actually going to be a breath of fresh air and have some real positive change. I've met Mark Sullivan, who's the head of AVMed, and I've got a lot of respect for him. The problem is that I don't actually on a day-to-day basis have much exposure to either of those gentlemen, so I can't really comment where it's going to go. But, there's been a very dark period within CASA Avmed.
I mean, there's certainly one body of thought within the industry, which is that in the private world, AVMed is just not required. I mean, AOPA has a very strong view in respect to private medicals, which is that the best person to determine a person's fitness to fly is in fact their GP. And if their GP feels there's a need to obtain a specialist report in order for them to be comfortable with making a decision, that they should be empowered to do that, or even if it's their DAME. I mean, is CASA really the best body to be determining if a pilot is fit to fly, or should this not be assigned to the medical industry and CASA remove itself on that private pilot front?
Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack in that, and I guess from a conflict of interest point of view, I think it's important to note that I make a living out of seeing pilots. So if it shuts down a lot, then I might not make a living the same way. So, I don't say that I would be mistreating or mismanaging people, but I think it's important that people are aware that that's where I am. I definitely see there is significant scope for taking it out of the regulator's hands and being managed on the street on a day-to-day basis. Now, whether you say a GP can manage it or whether you say that it's got to go through a DAME, I can see arguments on both sides of the coin. The problem that we've got with GPs doing it at the moment, and there's some very good GPs doing it and there's some very busy GPs doing it, is a lot of them don't see enough to be consistently involved in it and over all the topics. I can't remember the statistics, but there's like 100 DAMEs in Victoria, and most of them are doing, 70% are doing less than 50 pilots a year. So there's issues that need to be managed around, but there's definitely room to take it out of the regulator's hands. But at the same time, if something's really complex, there's definitely scope to go to the regulator and say, here's the evidence, here's the specialist reports, this is a line ball decision, it's complex, step in and provide some counsel. Okay,
well, we're certainly not going to solve the problem immediately, but let's redirect now across to Damien. Damien, thank you for joining us this evening. You have your own particular experience in navigating the CASA Avmed system, and it stems from a stroke event which you had suffered. If maybe you could share with our viewers I guess a bit of background on that event, and then we might try and work our way through your experience in trying to navigate the Avmed system.
Okay. Well, 5 years ago, I had a basal ganglia hemorrhage, which is a particular type of stroke. It put me in hospital for 3 days. And when I was discharged, I had no medication to take. There's no rehab was necessary. I'd made pretty much a complete recovery. About a week later, I notified CASA, and they suspended my medicals and later cancelled them, which is, fair enough. You want to, I guess, play it safe in that first 12 months. Getting the medicals back was a bit of an ordeal. In fact, it was only my last renewal that I got my Class 1 and Class 2 medicals back without any sort of restriction on them. At my first renewal, back in 2016, I got my Class 1 and Class 2, and the Class 1 had a ASL with a qualified co-pilot restriction, and the Class 2 had with a safety pilot restriction. And again, fair enough. It's the first medical since the event. You want to keep a close eye on it. 6 months after that, so 6 months prior to my second renewal, I emailed CASA and I said to them, where do I need to be health-wise in order to have the restrictions lifted from my medical? And the response that I got was that I needed to have a risk of recurrence of less than 2.5% for an unrestricted Class 2 medical and 1% for a Class 1 medical. And so I emailed them back with some very specific questions. The first one, sorry, and I'll just dig that up again. Here we go. Okay, so the follow-up questions I emailed them was, what was my percentage recurrence determined to be at my last renewal in September 2016? Why was it determined to be so high, and what factors were used in that determination? Now, I received a reply from a GP at CASA, and essentially it said, following a hemorrhagic stroke, the ongoing annual risk of recurrence after the first year is at least 2 to 3%, which puts me beyond the risk tolerance for an unrestricted Class 1 and Class 2. Well, that was fine, but he couldn't tell me exactly what my risk of recurrence was. All he said was between 2 and 3%. And given that I've been told the risk of recurrence of 2.5% for an unrestricted Class 2, I wanted to know, was I below that or above that? And they couldn't tell me. And in fact, eventually he pretty much told me to get lost, and he wasn't going to reply to any more emails. So that was my first renewal. Now, my second renewal, I received a letter from CASA, and they said that my risk of recurrence was 2.3%. So this time they gave me a number. And recalling that email where they said I needed to be below 2.5% for an unrestricted Class 2, I emailed them again and asked them to clarify why there was still a restriction, still a requirement for a safety pilot on the Class 2, given that I was at 2.3% and the risk of recurrence greater than 2.5% barred me from having a Class 2. without a restriction. I never received an email reply to that. I did receive a phone call, of which there is no record anywhere, according to CASA. So that prompted me to initiate action at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. I felt I was being dealt with unjustly. And as part of that action, I received a number of what they call T documents from CASA, which is basically their evidence. And on one page of their evidence, there's a note: correction to calculation on stroke riskometer. 5-year risk, 11.46% equals 15.5 times baseline population risk of 0.74%. I'd never heard of a stroke riskometer, so I did a little bit of research on what it actually is. And what the stroke riskometer is, it's an app. You download it onto your iPhone or your iPad or whatever, and the very first thing that you see when you fire it up is a rather large disclaimer. And this disclaimer, I'll just go through the first 2 points of it. The disclaimer says your use of this stroke riskometer is at your own risk. While we have used reasonable endeavours to ensure that this stroke riskometer contains information and data that is accurate and up to date, we cannot guarantee that this stroke riskometer is 100% accurate, complete, up to date, or free from errors. Point 2, in particular, we cannot guarantee that any stroke risk prediction obtained from using the stroke riskometer will be 100% accurate or reliable. Now, that was a really big red flag right there. A number of factors may impact on the risk of someone having a stroke, and this stroke riskometer attempts to identify the most common factors. However, every person is different, and we cannot anticipate or foresee every risk factor that might apply to a particular individual. So basically what it's saying is it's not 100% accurate. So you could get a risk of recurrence of 1.5%, and it could be 1% or less or more.
And so, Damien, I'll just cut in here. So CASA were using an app,
yes,
to profile and grade your risk, but at the same time, you had already provided specialist reports, which they were ignoring in preference to simply using an app to determine your likelihood of recurrence.
Yes, and it gets better. Now, just prior to my first renewal, I'd seen a doctor of neurology and also a professor of neurology. The professor of neurology just happened to know the gentleman who authored the stroke riskometer app. And while I was there, he sent an email off to him just asking about or commenting about CASA's use of the app. And the email that the response that he got was, thank you for sharing this information with me. Although it is pleasing to know that the Australian aviation authorities are using our stroke riskometer to calculate a stroke risk, I must emphasise that we have not validated the stroke riskometer for predicting the risk of intracerebral hemorrhaging, I can't pronounce that bloody word, brain hemorrhage specifically, and only total risk of stroke overall. So,
not just, Damien, I'm just going to park you there. I mean, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, the national body to uphold safety standards on behalf of the aviation industry in this country, constantly banging on about their commitment to safety, refusing to reform their regulations because safety, safety, safety. And Damien, what you're telling me is Avmed were ignoring specialist advice by highly qualified neurosurgeons,
neurologists, Yeah.
and elected to use an app of which the manufacturer of that app, the developer of that app, the software producer of that app has informed you that they're deeply concerned that an aviation safety regulator is relying on that to make determinations. Is that correct?
Yep.
That is staggering. Sean, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, there's a lot of politics behind that.
I mean, well, let me redirect the question for you. I mean, we have a pilot who wants to return to flying, and this pilot has sought expert professional advice from leaders in their field or specialists in their field, people who have dedicated large portions of their life to learn about this area of medicine and to be, practitioners of it or professionals at it, to then have that advice ignored because someone wants to rely. And I dare say, I'll take a guess here. It was one of CASA's GPs, Damien, who was using this app.
Yes, it was.
A GP at working for CASA, denying a pilot his opportunity to return to flying and ignoring specialist advice. I mean, I just don't know how to explain that to anybody.
No, so I agree with the concept that we shouldn't be ignoring our specialist advice. I don't understand how the specialist advice is being overturned by people who aren't specialists in those fields. If CASA had a neurologist in their office and the neurologist said, yeah, I hear what he's saying, what Damien's neurologist is saying, but I have concerns because of this, then I can wear that. But that's not what they're saying. I find it very, very difficult to understand how some of these decisions are being handed down.
I'm going to throw a question across to Tony. I think I've buried you deep enough in that one, Sean, and I can see him. He's climbing his way out of the politically incorrect bucket.
Sorry.
So I'm not going to dive you in there deeper there, because I know you actually do. And I'll say this, Sean. You say it every time we have a conversation that whilst you're frustrated by what goes on, there are quite a few people inside of CASA you have a lot of time and a lot of respect for. So I don't want anyone to have the impression that I'm leading you here onto this broadcast to throw a spade at them. And I appreciate you for being upfront and honest, but I just don't want anyone to think I'm trying to drag you into into a muck fight. Tony, we're going to get back to Damien in a second, but Tony, I mean, my God, like, is this for real? This can't be serious. You're on mute there, mate. You're on mute.
Yep, sorry. It is serious, and it's just a travesty of natural justice, because we have two major examples of where CASA accepts a different standard for aviation medical compliance. One comes from the GFA, who do fly VH registered craft around our skies, have done for more than 70 years. And those guys enjoy the privilege of self-assessing medicals with their instructors having to do something equivalent to a Class 2 basic. But, millions and millions of flying hours over 70 years. And as everyone may recall, it came out in the RRAT Senate Committee 18 months ago, they cannot point to one failed pilot medical scenario which caused an accident. It just doesn't exist after millions of hours. Second, of course, we have the recreational pilots who also exist happily on a self-assessed medical. Basically, if you can drive a car, you can sign a disclaimer waiver form, and you're away flying. Now, this is just an absolute travesty of natural justice for every other VH pilot flying powered craft, where we have to be dragged through a Class 2 or a Class 2 basic.
No, Tony, I'll jump in here because you're absolutely right. And I have an example that we had to elevate up to the minister's office to get it resolved because, and I'm not going to name the guy. I don't think it'd be fair to name him on the program, but what I'll say is we had a AOPA Australia member who suffered a stroke event. CASA refused to reissue the medical. But during this fight that was going on, he just went out and got an RAOS aircraft and an RAOS license. And for the entire time that we were having this dispute with CASA, where CASA was saying he was a risk to aviation safety, he was flying around in an RAOS aircraft the whole time. And it went, and we worked with this individual, and we went right through this process. It went on, and let me tell you, it went on for 2 years. And the only reason in the end that we were able to get CASA to move is that I pushed it up to the Deputy Prime Minister's office and said, take a look at this. Avmed have wasted 2 years of internal resources. I think, Sean, let's not forget this one fact. There's a considerable amount of money that CASA budget for running Avmed that gets spent on all these people to just create delays and create obstacles and to cost the industry a lot of money. And I'd near argue that for every dollar that Avmed invest into its own people, Avmed cost us, the industry, probably a factor and multiple of 4 or 5 or 6. But this poor bastard was being told by CASA he was a risk to aviation safety. And all the while he was flying around in an RAOS aircraft. And the hilarious part was the determined nature that Avmed went to avoid reissuing a medical for this guy. And as soon as we pushed it up to the DPM's office, my God, did we get some action. I mean, it was like a rocket went up the arse of CASA at that moment. And everyone went scurrying around to fix it. And then they issued him a medical because, by God, they can't have been letting this guy fly and all of a sudden, not issue the class 2. So there is a real problem in this. And I imagine that that's having a huge impact, Tony, on things like the SAAA and the broader general aviation industry, because it's stopping people from participating.
It is, Ben. I mean, I have many members, many past members who have been frustrated with being able to get a medical, and as a consequence, they've left VH registered aircraft flying, and they have gone to RALs, and they're happily flying around. Not in their old Cessna or not in their their RV7 or whatever. They've sold that and they've gone and bought something that's ultralight category, and they're flying around that, an LSA, and it's just a travesty of natural justice that we have these two systems. And what I was going to sort of finish by is that the only reason that I can come up as a plausible reason when you analyse all of these bits of fact is that CASA is using medical as a guise to force an economic outcome. And the fact is CASA do not want private pilots on their books that they have to manage. So the way to get rid of those pilots is make it too hard to get a medical and push them off into self-administration. And I say, I just don't know where our politicians are in all of this, because, if we had our rights being impinged like this in any other parts of our community, there'd be a absolute war cry going on in Parliament. But it just...
Well, I think, Tony, we're probably heading towards that. And if the emails of support that we are now receiving from the broader industry on these live broadcasts is anything to go by, I can honestly say that I feel for the first time in the 4 years that I've been part of AOPA that there is now a groundswell movement of participation from the broader industry to say really enough's enough. And it really is time that a lot of people speak up and be heard for the things that have happened to them. And even if it's a historical medical event where you were dragged through the muck and made spend thousands of dollars, it needs to be put on the public record, because there needs and there absolutely must be a demonstration in a way in which these slippery bastard bureaucrats, they really are slippery bastards, they must not be able to escape that their lack of their lack of producing a workable system has resulted in a significant damage to the aviation industry. It has cost not only AOPA Australia members, it's cost the broader aircraft owner and pilot community and GA business community millions and millions of dollars of lost productivity and damage to businesses and the impost of maintaining rights. I'll throw this back to Damien. And Damien, we really do appreciate you coming forward on this. And I think in fairness, I'd just like to say to our viewers that, you know, you reached out as a consequence of some of the other broadcasts that we were doing. And you said, look, Ben, people really should know what goes on behind the scenes and we should talk about it. And I want to thank you for doing that because it takes a bit to stand up. People are often scared shitless that if they say something, CASA is going to come after them. And I have to say, and I'm going to come to you in a second, I have to say that it is actually real. Don't think for a minute that this doesn't go on. It actually does go on. And there's quite a few people that are speaking to us at the moment about coming on the program, but we're trying to work out ways in which we can protect those individuals because it is wrong that that happens, but they do get targeted. And in fact, we've got an individual who's waiting here in the background. You can't see him on screen at the moment, but he's going to join us very shortly. And we're going to have a brief conversation about that kind of behaviour. But Damien, you've got specialist reports. You've got obviously medical science on your side. CASA have elected to pursue the app. Where to from there?
Well, things changed once I initiated the action at the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. Up until that point, CASA had not consulted with a neurologist. It wasn't until the case was going ahead at the AAT that CASA finally consulted with a neurologist. And in fact, just prior to them getting his report, they took my medical away from the doctor who'd used the app and they gave it to a different doctor. And I got a phone call from the legal team offering me an unrestricted Class 2. Now, this is before they consulted with the neurologist. So I guess they started backpedaling. They didn't really want to go to the AAT, I don't think.
So CASA reached out. Obviously, you've initiated that AAT function. You wanted to protect your rights. And as that's just about to occur, CASA's legal guys reached out and said, let's settle this. We'll give you an unrestricted medical. You chose not to do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They offered me an unrestricted Class 2.
Why do you think that they offered to settle it at that point in time?
Well, I guess because with the evidence that they provided, I probably could have won. I probably could have won. I'm sort of trying to find the right words here without sort of upsetting too many people. I guess they knew they were doing the wrong thing in terms of using the app and all the rest of it. Had they not offered me the unrestricted Class 2, had they not given my medical or my case to a different doctor, then I would have had the original doctor as a witness, and we would have been able to tear him apart, quite honestly.
Okay, so you decide you want to continue. Where do we end up from here?
Well, so after they offered me the unrestricted Class 2, they consulted with a neurologist, and we went into a mediation session. So we all went into the AAT building in Melbourne, and we sat around the table. And what they were concerned about, they were still concerned about having a recurrence or me having a recurrence. And they were concerned that with an unrestricted class 2, I might go and get an instructor rating, because although I had my RAOS instructor rating, I didn't have a CASA instructor rating. So they were concerned that I might have a recurrence while I was training an ab initio student who hadn't soloed yet. So, you know, he couldn't land the plane, or they couldn't land the plane. So they wanted to sort of alleviate that risk. And so they offered me a class 2 with a restriction that I couldn't instruct. And again, I'd knocked that back. And then we ended up in the courtroom at the AAT, and they brought on their neurologist. And the thing is, their neurologist put their case forward very clearly, very concisely. We could understand exactly where he was coming from. And so at that point, we said, right, we'll go and negotiate something with you. And we did that. And I ended up with a class 2 with the restriction that I wasn't allowed to instruct any pre-solo students. Now, given that I wasn't getting my instructor rating after all, that didn't really worry me that much. And it gave me the opportunity to start training to be a freight pilot. And so I did. And then finally, at my last renewal, I got a letter from a previous PMO, and it said that my condition appeared to be stable. All restrictions were going to be lifted. And so now I have an unrestricted class 1 and class 2. Now, it's my firm belief that had I not initiated the action at the AAT, I would still have a co-pilot restriction on my class 1 and a safety pilot restriction on my class 2, because I wouldn't have known about them using the app, and I just would have used it again and again and again.
And so through this experience, Damien, I imagine you've spent some time researching how this situation would have played out in other countries. And
Yes.
you and I briefly had the opportunity to speak about how the US functions in comparison to Australia in this space. Would you like to share with our viewers what you learnt there?
Yes, absolutely. So if I was in the United States, I would not be granted for 1 year, I'd be granted for 2 years. But once that 2 years was up, I would have to do 3 tests, and provided I passed them, I would be issued with a first-class medical on a waiver. And the 3 tests are a carotid ultrasound. So they ultrasound your neck, basically. I believe they're looking for plaque or other deposits that can make their way up into your brain. I had to do the next test is a 24-hour Holter monitor. So they monitor your heart for 24 hours. And the third test is an FAA specific neuropsychological test. Now, I've done a neuropsych test before. When I first got out of hospital after my event, I had to go and do one. And they get you to memorize numbers, and so they'll give you a sequence. You've got to read it backwards to them, and there's a lot of memory stuff involved, and you know, putting shapes together to form. Putting blocks together to form shapes and stuff like that. I'm not sure what the FAA specific one covers. It's probably a bit more complicated than the one that I did. But I did do the carotid ultrasound. I did the Holter monitor because I wanted to prove that I could get an FAA medical, even with having the stroke event 5 years ago. I stopped short of doing the neuropsych test because it would have cost about $3,000 to $3,500, to get it done over here. And that's the only reason I didn't do it.
So from what you learned, you would have passed those tests.
Yep.
And you would have been up and flying within 2 years. Is that correct?
That's right.
And yet under the Australian system, you've spent 5 years, a huge amount of stress, a huge amount of cost and expense attached to that to get yourself back to flying.
Yep.
Wow. When CASA say they're the 6th best regulator in the world, they really mean it, don't they, Tony?
Absolutely. I wouldn't even put them at number 6, to be honest. It's just, it beggars belief. I mean, we've been talking about this medical issue now for many years. Ben, you and I have been doing it for 4 years. The predecessors of the SAAA have been talking about it for a lot longer than that. You know, we've taken it to CASA's doorstep so many times, and we just get basically ignored. And yet there is, you know, example after example after example where obviously a lower standard is acceptable to CASA, but they will not promulgate that throughout the rest of the community. And, you know, I just, you know, even under the latest rewrite of our regulations, the CASA's Part 61 license, you know, I keep coming back to Clause 385. It just asks a simple question: are you fit? Yes or no? You know, and every pilot makes that decision on the day. And yet, CASA Avmed turned this into a massive grass castle construction. And as I said earlier, the only true understanding of why they're doing it is because CASA do not want to manage private pilots. They want to push them off into the SAOs, and the best way to get rid of those people is to cancel their medical, because as we all know, you can run away and get a RAOS license the very next day, and you can be flying the very next day. So,
well, Tony, I've got an AOPA Australia member over in Bathurst who's a truck driver, and I absolutely love the guy because he speaks plainly, he speaks direct to the issue, and he just doesn't suffer the bull dust. And I have to say that he has had his own troubles and dilemmas with Avmed, and I think that he shares a view which I'm interested from Sean, which is that there just must be this incredible frustration from the DAME community that you are being overruled by an organisation that is really showing a fair degree of incompetence on some of these issues. And I will accept that there are cases and there are examples where CASA are most certainly justified, but it certainly appears to me, and I'm not a medical professional, it certainly appears to me that the DAME community are being overruled on far too many medical applications. And that overruling and the requirement for additional testing and the requirement for all these, you know, I was going to say inspections to use a maintenance term. Yeah, this is costing thousands and thousands of dollars. It then forces pilots to then have to make application to the AAT. All of this costs money. All of this is costing a huge amount of time. And most certainly the thing that does not get discussed enough, this is creating unnecessary stress and mental pressure on a community that's already under a fair bit of stress already. You know, you must be frustrated by this, Sean.
Yeah, I am very frustrated by it. And if somebody can go through the mental stress of going through the AAT, then, you know, the ballsy part of me says that they're probably fit to fly. You know, if they can cope with that level of stress, they're probably safe in the air. It's interesting hearing Damien talk, you know, because I've got a pilot who has actually said to CASA, I'm almost in the same situation as Damien. I won't fly above 10,000 feet. I won't fly aerobatics. I won't fly in a controlled airspace, and CASA still won't give him his medical. The problem I see is that we have legal oversight of a medical situation. And I look at, you know, I often say, oh, you know, something's been to complex case meeting. Where's it at? Oh, it's with the legal team for a response. It's like, It's a medical decision. You know, and I don't understand why legal is making what appears to be clinical decisions on pilots.
Well, there's certainly a lot of questions over CASA legal and its behaviour and its conduct. I mean, even as late as the recent news which has arrived on the Glenn Buckley situation, Tony, we interviewed Glenn Buckley, the former founder and owner-operator of the APTA, which CASA sought to shut down effectively. They did that by way of frustrating that business through demands for change that were, as the Commonwealth Ombudsman is now saying, that there was really no regulatory power for CASA to do what they have done, that the franchising of that particular business and its nature to franchise flight training AOCs is perfectly legal. There really was not a case to say it was undesirable by CASA, and so their actions resulted in the destruction of what Glenn reports to be a $4 million enterprise. And we now find out by the Commonwealth Ombudsman that no, they didn't have a regulatory position to do that. I mean, the thing that I often find quite unique in a lot of this, and I know, I'm pretty vocal on some of this stuff. I think everyone would agree I'm pretty vocal on a hell of a lot of things on aviation at the moment. But the thing that I find so frustrating with it is, when CASA come after someone within our industry, whether it's you've disobeyed medical regulation, you've disobeyed regulation pertaining to the conduct of a flight, or you have disobeyed regulation with respect to the maintenance of an aircraft, or the operation of a flight training school or a maintenance business or a charter operator, whatever it might be, CASA will use the hard and firm line that ignorance of what the regulations are is no defence. You must know what the regulations expect of you and what you need to do to remain compliant and legal. And yet we see time and time and time again the regulator getting it wrong. Now, if these bloody rules were as easy to understand as these bastards in Canberra continue to thump into everyone within the political system, that they're so good, they're so easy to understand that we don't know what Ben Morgan's rabbiting on about, we've got no clue why AOPA's upset on behalf of all of its members, then how the hell does the top tier executive of CASA pursue a company without a regulatory basis to do so, if the regs are that clear and concise? If they themselves can't follow their own rules and they can't use their authority and power within that framework, what bloody chance does anyone from the aviation industry have of complying? And I know, Tony, I've heard you say it before, Ben, people probably don't even know anymore whether you're in compliance or not. Things have gotten that complicated and that silly. And so, you really have to question what's going on and where and what is driving all of this mess. Damien, I'm sensitive on time. We've already been 53 minutes into this tonight, and probably I'm guilty of speaking too much again. I've got a few out there that keep telling me, shut up, Ben, let your guest talk. I want to thank you for coming along this evening and sharing your particular story with us. It's horrifying to see that you have had to spend 5 years and a substantial amount of time and money to keep involved in general aviation. But, we tip our hat to you and we thank you for sticking it out, because right now the industry needs as many people flying and taking part as possible, because it's those flight hours. It's those flight hours that keep the general aviation industry turning. So on behalf of AOPA and our membership, we thank you for sticking it.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to very quickly swap out Damien, and I'm bringing in my next guest. We're actually joined by a second guest this evening, so I'll just add him to the stream. G'day, how you going, Shannon?
Oh, hey, just looking at a lovely glass there on the AOPA classifieds. How are you?
So for all of those people out there following us in Facebook land, and obviously to all the people that will get the opportunity to watch this broadcast in the weeks to come, and just quickly on that, we are very, very fortunate in terms that our audience is growing quite spectacularly on these streams. And just to give you guys a bit of background, we we're up around like 50 to 80,000 total contacts for these, which is just brilliant. And it just shows how many people care about the aviation industry. Shannon Baker has a particularly interesting story, and it's not directly related to Avmed. And we had originally hoped to have Shannon's story on tonight, but Shannon wasn't available until a little bit later this evening. And so what we will be doing is splitting this video a little bit later so that it can be seen as two complete videos. But we're going to get a bit of background on Shannon's story and his involvement. I can tell you probably doesn't want this involvement. He's got involvement with CASA at the moment. And it's a story that really outlines a range of problems with respect to the way that the regulator is working with industry. And so obviously Tony and Sean stick around. I'm sure you'll be just as horrified as I have been listening to what's taken place. But Shannon, maybe you'd like to just share a bit of an overview as to how you have run afoul of the CASA system. And then what we can do is we can get involved in a bit of a conversation about how you're finding navigating that process and where things look to be headed. You probably do need a big glass of water before you start this one.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for having me on, Ben. And Sean, good to see you again. You actually did a few of my class ones in Moorabbin. For a Kiwi, he goes all right.
That's what we think.
But yeah, no, so basically early this year, I actually went to CASA with an issue as a whistleblower, and it's turned around and come back at me now. So, but it's turned into a few other issues as they started digging to come after me.
And so we just want to say up front, we're going to be very careful here. We're not going to be naming company names. We're not going to be naming individuals' names, other than to say you were working for somebody, and during the time that you were working for them, you had a range of safety concerns. And where's he gone? Have we just lost him?
He's gone.
Oh, his data connection's just cut out. Bugger. Well, I'll tell you what, just hold fire and let's see if we can quickly get him reconnected. He'll be jumping in. Hopefully, there he is.
Yeah, sorry.
We thought CASA must have cut the feed.
Yeah.
So I'll just finish off. So you work for a company. You had a range of safety concerns which you brought up in relation to that, and then later on it turned out that CASA had received a report about some flying that you had done, and
yeah, alleged low flying. Yeah.
Okay, and so that allegation was made against you by, well, actually, I think that you were saying the original complaint was a bird watcher or something had photographed you.
Yeah. So originally, I'm led to believe it was originally a noise complaint from a park ranger on the island, and there's a species of bird there called the crested fern, which is a rare migratory species, which I found interesting as they kept going back to that issue. But there's no FNH box or flight neighborhood agreements or anything over that island. There's no restrictions or anything, and I feel when I've pointed out that fact, they basically then started trying to use other excuses and just make up whatever to fit their case.
Okay, so we have a complaint of low flying is made against you. When you were notified of that complaint, you strongly refuted any allegation that you had been conducting low flying. That's correct?
Correct. And even with the photographs taken, CASA have even admitted themselves it shows the aircraft over 500 feet, which is a minimum height required. And you look at the ADS-B data where it lines up with the photograph. And on the ADS-B, it shows it under that. Yet then they turn around and disregard the photographs once they've realized they've said that it was over 500 feet.
But again, Shannon, it's a very important point to make that the investigator that was appointed to look into this particular concern had in fact discussed with you, I think it was via email or something at the time, you had had a discussion in which they recognised that the photographs showed that you were able to provide, showed that the aircraft from the perspective of the photos taken on board was definitely above that 500-foot minimum, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was confirmed in the email. And there's
so Shannon,
a whole bunch of other
this should have been
reasons.
an open and shut case. This should have just simply been, okay, we've got a complaint. We come to you. You obviously refuted it and said, look, it's just not true. And I had some family on board that private flight, and here is some photographs that were taken. It clearly shows that we were not flying low. That really should have been the end of it.
Oh, the aircraft was actually empty. It was just myself.
Was just you, was it? Sorry. Okay.
Yep.
So I misinterpreted some of our info in the background.
That's
so
okay.
That should have been the end of the case, but it wasn't.
No, it wasn't. It's actually been going on for 8 months now. This happened in December. So absolute waste of resources, if you ask me. Yeah, I just feel the whole process, they've kind of picked and choosed what information, going back to what others have said on the show, I don't believe it's incompetence at all from CASA. I think it's a bit darker than that, and they know what they're doing, but they just like to leave the option open to go, oh, sorry, we were wrong, and then just wash their hands and walk away from it without accountability when they make the wrong decision and cost people a lot of money, similar to Avmed decisions.
So in this process, Shannon, you obviously have had to defend yourself. You've had to engage a lawyer.
Yeah, if you use a lawyer, it's probably 20,000 so far, roughly.
So can I
that's just a response.
I'm going to ask a rude question. I'm 42 years of age. I know I must look like I'm 23. I'm baby faced. How old are you, mate?
32.
You're 32 years of age.
Yep.
And how much money have you invested in getting your license? How much have you spent all up tooling up your license?
I haven't actually wanted to add it up, but it's probably, including a Metroliner endorsement, probably in the region of 160, 170,000 as an estimate. Yeah.
A 32-year-old, you look like a hard-working Aussie boy. You're in WA. When I called you earlier today, I think you're out on a harvester, were you?
Yeah, I was going to get out on the harvester, but it started raining, so we had to put a stop to that. So.
Rain in WA, Tony, that must be a rarity. So you've got, here you are, 160,000 in on this license. You're trying to get started in the aviation industry, and effectively the air police come along. I call them the air police because sometimes you wonder if that's not what they think they are. I think I got quoted once in a meeting with someone at CASA saying if only they could have Black Hawk SWAT gear and rappelling ropes, they'd be probably quite happy. Right? They come ploughing through the roof of your hangar. We're here to save you. But you've got a CASA guy that comes, who makes an allegation based on a complaint from a ranger that you were flying low. You give him your sworn statement in return to say, no, I wasn't. And by the way, I got some photographs. And instead of the issue being dropped and probably some counselling to encourage adherence to strict safety rules, understanding that everyone wants a safe industry, and I've spoken with you, I get the impression you want a safe industry. Instead of it just being over and done with, it becomes an ordeal where it's now what they want to throw the entire book at you. Is that what's going on?
Yeah, they've asked me for my logbook to audit that. They've cancelled me over doing the whistleblowing as well, so they've turned that around on me myself. And
what's their concerns with that?
So it's in regard to asking to not record defects, which we all know is quite common as well with some operators. But, when I brought that to their attention and they turned around and go, oh, you didn't record defects, so we're going to punish you. It's like, well, hang on. How many hundreds of other pilots in the last 2 years haven't recorded those?
So do you feel the
defects?
Safety regulator that is responsible for the safety of Australia's aviation system, do you feel that you could bring concerns forward to them, or do you
Absolutely not.
feel that it will somehow be used against you?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly what's happened. And I'm not sure whether there may be a conflict of interest at play there or whatever. You know, it's a small industry. People have friends everywhere. But yeah, I found it very interesting and very surprising, because I'm actually someone that self-declared a medical issue with my eyesight. Sean might not remember, but I had laser eye surgery. And yeah, I actually self-declared issue with that. And everyone was like, oh, why did you declare it? Why did you tell CASA? And I said, well, you know, that's the rules. If you're not right, you're not right. Even though I could have easily gotten away with it, because I could have still read the Class 1 requirements on the eye chart. I still chose to self-declare that. And basically then I just went and got a letter once it was rectified, and then sent that to CASA, and CASA were okay with that. So I thought from that side, CASA was okay. That was in 2016. But yeah, with this one here, they've basically turned around and said, oh, you're trying to attack a company here. Whereas, you know, they haven't taken it seriously at all, even though there's enough evidence there. And that's going back to CASA choosing what facts or non-facts they want to apply and listen to, such as going back to that stroke app that the gentleman was talking about previously, where they just try to choose what information they want to listen to or not listen to. So,
Tony, I'll direct a question to you on this. I mean, you and I have heard some pretty outstanding stories across our time in aviation. You've been involved in aviation far longer than I have. I mean, this is not an uncommon story, is it?
Unfortunately, Ben, no, it's not an uncommon story, and it makes a lot of people very nervous about speaking out about different issues that are going on, and you know, it's still, after the time that I've had in aviation myself, most of it's been enjoyable. You know, I've had my times where I've run foul of the regulator, and it just is gobsmacking the way in which that can spiral out of control very, very easily, and you just wonder whether you are being victimised, or you know, what is their corporate agenda in terms of dealing with pilots and operators, AOC holders, blah, 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 blah. It seems that CASA's initial approach is always to use a 14-pound hammer to crack a walnut, and education is the last thing that they're prepared to actually do in terms of counselling pilots, which is something they've gone further and further and further away from when I first started my career, where you had experienced guys working for CASA who were pilots, you know, and if you made a mistake, they come and talked to you. They counselled you. You know, it was a bit like getting you know, a visit from the headmaster. But you know, no one tried to destroy your career, destroy your bank balance, you know, take your first child. But that's the attitude today, and it's very, very frustrating for a lot of pilots. I know other guys out there, other than Shannon, who have run foul of the regulator, and it costs them tens of thousands of dollars to defend themselves. And a lot of the times, in fact, I'd say most of the times, CASA fails to achieve a conviction. But you know, what they are doing is they're economically crippling people with effectively, I can only use the word false allegations.
Well, what surprises me with this, and I've had this conversation today, and I think also just to let you know, Shannon, that quite unconnected to you and I having a conversation, I received another telephone call yesterday from another person who's having a significant problem with CASA, and lo and behold, it's the same investigator.
Well,
it's the
that's
same
not surprising at all, is it?
Investigator. And it really troubles me. It really troubles me when you start to connect the dots and you start to realize that all roads start pointing to Rome, and that there's a common denominator in many of these stories, that it only takes one bad apple in the system and all of a sudden you've now got a multitude of outcome events that are highly damaging to industry. Let's face it, it's incredibly damaging to CASA's relationship with the pilot community. And it really doesn't do CASA any good, and it's not doing the industry any good. And, you know, and what I would say to this is, you know, if you, you know, we hear it all the time. You get someone, oh, someone was so-and-so was caught speeding doing 120 in a 60 zone. Would we all agree that's pretty dangerous? We would, right? Well, Tony's got some hesitation. You like to drive fast, Tony. 120 in a 60 zone is dangerous because, let's face it, you'd be operating a vehicle at high speed. 60 zones are typically your inter suburban township roads. Chances are you've got the potential for the public to be on the sides of the streets. If something were to go wrong, it would be horrific. Now, if you're a driver and you're caught doing 120 in a 60 zone, they're going to throw a pretty big fine at you, and you're definitely going to have some pain in your life. But it's not going to decimate your capacity to earn a living. It's not going to decimate your reputation to a point where you're not going to work in an industry again. You know, it's effectively a fine outcome and potentially a suspension of license outcome for a period of time. But time and time again, I hear with CASA, you know, it's literally pursuing a person to see to it that they have no license left, or worse still, this clangor that we hear time and time again, having a person declared not a fit and proper person, which would prevent them from ever participating again. I mean, Shannon, do you feel that the focus so far from CASA matches the crime that you've been alleged to have committed but haven't committed at all?
I find it's extremely disproportionate, and even on CASA's own words, an infringement should never have been issued, as it's only beyond a reasonable doubt, which they've even stated themselves it's not. So.
Now, Shannon, you've obviously stood up for yourself. You're not a wallflower. I mean, you and I have had some conversation, and you've been very clear that you don't want your professional working reputation damaged, and you don't want your licenses infringed, and so on and so forth. Do you think standing up for yourself has made you a bigger target?
Absolutely. They're using words out of the enforcement manual saying I lack contrition, which is out of their fit and proper person manual. So my fear now is if I basically win against this adverse administrative decision, they'll just turn around and deem me to be a not fit and proper person, as has been shown in the past with a previous individual. I believe he may be out of Wagen, where he was accused of low flying across the Nullarbor. He took it to court. He won, and after winning, CASA just deemed him to be not fit and proper, and still took his license off him, and is hasn't been in GA since for 15 years.
Shannon, so we would love to hear from him, and I'm sure the Australian Senate would love to hear from him as well. And I'd invite you after this conversation, let's make sure we find a way of tracking him down, because again, these stories need to be told. The government needs to see that this is how our community has been treated. This is how the aviation industry is pursued by CASA when they decide to get their set on. Obviously, this is an ongoing process. What would you like to see happen, Shannon?
Look, if these things were one-offs due to a few bad apples, you can fix those bad apples and repair the damaged relationship with CASA and the rest of the industry. But it just seems to be an ongoing theme for the last decades, really. And I feel with CASA as an organisation, I feel they've really shown their incompetence at dealing with the industry in a proper way, where the focus should be on education rather than punishment. And when they do go through punishment, they go to the extreme as well. I feel CASA isn't really fit to be a enforcement agency, and they really should stick to administrative only. And maybe it's time to separate and have a separate enforcement agency, whether it's part of the Federal Police as an aviation branch or something, but people that will conduct proper thorough investigations rather than going off of feelings and opinions. So,
well, Shannon, I'm certain if we invited some aviation lawyers on the program and asked them to give us their opinions, I could almost bet I would hear the phrase, "They're not a model litigant." And I hear this all the time in my conversations with aviation lawyers saying, "Ben, you've got to understand, CASA are supposed to be a model litigant, but time and time again, they demonstrate themselves to be anything but." And so I would share that frustration with you, but I just wonder, given the current climate and the fact that we've got a minister, and let's understand this, we've got a minister that's effectively powerless. Just understand this. He's effectively powerless to stop what's going on with CASA. They're a statutory authority. They are not able to be interfered with by their minister. The way that the legislation was set up, they are a standalone organisation. They have a board which is supposedly there to help ensure that the governance and ethical conduct of the organisation is being adhered to. But the board is about as silent as, the Titanic is at the bottom of the bloody ocean right now. And I know Tony called me up last week and he's unhappy with me because he's saying that people who come on this program give half truths. They don't give the whole story, and how there's always two sides to the story. And I think we've already said it, Tony, you are more than welcome to come on this program at any time. There is an open invitation for the chairman of CASA to come on and take the questions. I'm sure that the aviation industry would love to put some questions to you. I know that we've got some questions we would love answered. And so come on the program and give us the other side of the story, because we're all wondering what that story may be. But given that the minister can't just direct CASA, he can't just tell them to do something, we're really at a point now where it's going to take the Parliament of Australia to intervene and change the legislation. And so I guess a prospect there is exactly as you're saying, split the organisation back into being an administration and bring it back under the direct purview and control of the minister.
That would be one option.
Yeah. The one problem with that, guys, is that the bureaucrats will just find a way to make it bigger and more unwieldy. And I just remind everybody that, in the last 20 years, CASA's gone from 350 officers to over 800, and we've had a GA sector particularly, which has been going downhill. So don't give them any opportunity to build up their grass castle any more than what they've got. It actually needs to be torn down, and then they need to get rid of the legal fraternity out of CASA, make them use central legal services from the federal government and not have their own legal department. That's what's killing it. The technical guys inside CASA can't do their job until they get the say-so from the legal department. CASA is tied in knots because of that.
Sean, you're an aircraft owner, you're a pilot, you're a DAME, you're now an internet superstar, and you're probably number one on CASA's most wanted list, effective of this evening. As a participant of the aviation industry, and I would say a reasonably well-informed participant of the aviation industry, what's your take? I mean, should CASA be taking a stronger education role, or should it be continuing with its current level of enforcement that we're seeing play out with the likes of Shannon and others?
So I always believe that you get a better response with a carrot, and there are times to bring out a stick, but I think the aviation industry is being beaten pretty hard with its stick at the moment. I mean, I know I have. I've been told by members of AVMED that if I continue advocating for the pilots the way that I do, maybe I should consider another career. So
hang on a second, Sean. Are you serious that you've been told
Yep.
that if you and I assume it's not advocating for AOPA, but I guess standing up for pilots in advocating their cause, their medical cause, that this is you are risking your future as a DAME. Is that right?
Absolutely. I need to understand I work for CASA, and if I can't work in the sphere, or if I can't advocate in the sphere that they want the way that I want, then I should reconsider my career aspirations.
Wow. I mean, this is bloody, mafia stuff, Tony.
Absolutely mafia stuff. And I'm not surprised. It's not the first time I've heard it. Yeah, we have another well-known Damien over this side of Australia who's run foul of CASA. In fact, he used to head up Avmed many years ago. He knows the process inside out. But if you don't tip your hat and tug your forelock to the DAS, then you can be kicked out.
You can't make this stuff up, Ben.
Well, look, I've said this. I mean, I'm on the public record. I've sat in front of Senate inquiries, and I've said it. I'll say it again. There is something wrong. There is something wrong with the way in which CASA are managing this industry by way of the delivery of its regulatory framework and the enforcement of that regulatory framework. And as someone has just rightfully said, this discussion should be sent straight to an ICAC. Well, the problem is there's no bloody federal commission against corruption because the damn federal politicians keep voting against it. And what should that tell you? What should that tell you? If they had nothing to hide, they would support it and they would absolutely embrace it. But unfortunately, it leaves our industry and so many others across so many other industries powerless to address it. Gentlemen, we could honestly spend the rest of tonight digging through this, and I'm sure that by the end of the conversation, the SAAA will have lost every exemption that allows them to operate. Dr. Sean Runacres probably would not be practicing as a DAME anymore. Poor old Shannon will never step foot on board an aircraft, and I'd probably find some dark characters hanging around the car park when I head out later. So we won't do that. But other than to say thank you very much, everyone, for making the time tonight. We do appreciate it. These panel discussions are absolutely important. I cannot stress this to the broader industry enough. Now is the time to speak up. Now is the time to stand with the rest of us that are standing here fighting to provide exposure to the fact that there are things going on, and there's been things going on that frankly shouldn't be going on right across the CASA system, and we need them to be fixed. I can tell you with absolute authority, the Senate RRAT are watching these, Department of Infrastructure are watching these, representatives of the Deputy Prime Minister's office are watching these, and we are in the process right now of collating these videos into a much bigger framework, and we intend on putting together a communication that will be sent to every member of Parliament and every senator, every member and senator in every state government. We intend on circulating what has been going on into this industry to every single political representative right across the Australian system with one clear call, and that is it is time to clean up CASA. Our industry doesn't need cleaning up. The regulator needs cleaning up, and it needs a cleaning of house in order to achieve it. And we'll probably start addressing some more of those discussions next week. Next week, we are going to be joined by just another shocking story. Tony, this one, I'd like to say this one would send you grey, but you're getting there anyway through the frustrations of dealing with a busted system. But I have a gentleman that will be joining us who has don't worry, mate, I'm getting grey too. I've got a gentleman that's joining us who has a drone business, and he has been exposed to no end of harassment from the CASA system. And as a consequence, it has cost he and his wife and their family an enormous amount of money. It has introduced a significant amount of personal stress into the household, which is now causing no end of serious concerns for them. And it all stems from just absolute stupidity that shouldn't be going on, but is going on because, again, nobody is overseeing the application of CASA's power. There is no one protecting us and protecting our industry from that power being abused and being meted out against the industry in a way in which it's creating horrific damage. So thank you to all of our viewers right across Australia, to the tens of thousands of people who have been able to see this content online. If you're not currently an AOPA Australia member, here's my plug. I've been told by my board I have to do this at the end of every video, and that is Bucks make Buck Rogers fly. We are standing up and we are fighting for you. We are standing up and we are fighting for you. There is no confusion as to what we're doing. We are fighting for you, and this is a major push to try and get some sensibility injected into the system so that our industry stands a chance of going forward. And whether it be Shannon or whether it be members of the sport aviation community or pilots that are needing access to DAMEs, where they're fighting. And we cannot do this. We just can't do it without the funding of members. Okay, we're not a self-administration. Nobody's forced to be a member, and therefore we have a million plus in funding. We are an entirely voluntary organisation in which you choose to be involved or you choose not to. And what I would like to believe is that the thousands of people that are watching these videos can send a powerful message to the minister, send a powerful message to the government and CASA, which is that you support us standing up and fighting for you by just joining. Every single member we add enables us to go that little bit further. So www.aopa.com.au/membership. That's aopa.com.au/membership. Now I get to see the little member alerts when they come in. So I'd like to see a few chime in there tonight. Throw some fuel into the tank of the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. And we'll do what we can to try and drive that change. And while you're also at it, if you're feeling extra generous and you want to get involved in the greatest section there is in general aviation, which is sport aviation, possibly build yourself one of those RVs that everyone says you'll get the RV grin and you'll never turn back. Join the SAAA, the Sport Aircraft Association of Australia. You certainly won't regret that either. Gentlemen, thank you, everybody. And I hope you all have a wonderful night.
Thanks very much, Ben.
Thank you.